Is that okay? Yeah, because you're all sitting nice and relaxed. Good morning, everybody, first of all. And I want to say, first of all, I'm delighted to be here and honoured to be here at the European Down Syndrome Annual Conference. And I'd like to thank particularly Pat Clark for inviting me, but also for allowing me the opportunity to talk on the issue of education, disability and Down syndrome, but also to talk on a couple of other issues as well that I'd like to hit on. I want to congratulate Pat as well on being the European President. I want to wish him well and the best of luck in the job, Pat. I also want to warmly welcome our visitors here from the different countries. I believe we have in the region of 22 countries visiting, and I want to say you're very, very welcome to Ireland. I hope you enjoy your stay, and I hope that everything works out well while you're here. Just in relation to the issue on education, when we talk about inclusive education, just want to touch on that. Pat just touched on the issue as well as being a Minister of State for Disabilities in the Irish education system. I'm also a parent of a daughter with an intellectual disability. Cleena has Down syndrome. She's now aged 30. We started off together many, many years ago as young parents, about nearly 25 years ago at least, I'd say, campaigning for the rights of people with disabilities, and in our case the rights of our daughters and sons with Down syndrome. And I was involved, and I was Secretary of the Dublin branch, Chairperson of the Dublin branch of Down Syndrome Ireland, and I was on the National Executive for a while. So I had a background in that issue as well. So I'm coming from both as a parent but also as an advocate for people with disabilities. And then, I don't know whether Pat has told you, or an unusual thing happened a year and a half ago in Ireland. They didn't get enough members of Parliament elected to form a government. And the two big parties, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, didn't have the numbers to form the government, so they needed independence. And I was an independent member of Parliament for 16 years, and we held the balance of power. So we sat down, we had a programme for government, we formed a programme for government. So of course I put down in the negotiations all about service for people with disabilities, respite services, day services, inclusive education. That was my little shopping list. Put that in the programme for government. But then the key thing was that we also appoint somebody at the cabinet table, which is a minister, to deal specifically with disability issues, because the disability services, following the years of austerity, were absolutely devastated, and we all took the hit, both at Irish level and European level. We all understand that. So that's my kind of background where I'm coming from. So I just want to point that out to you, to give you that I'm not coming in from the outside. I've been at the coalface for 20 years in relation to people with disabilities. But my vision is very simple: as reform the disability services in Ireland and Europe as well, and all the European countries, invest in the services. But above all, my key message is what I say to every single department and every single person in Ireland is: put the person with the disability at the centre of the service. And that is something that I will do. Not the department, not the minister, not the other bureaucracies within the health system. It's the person with the disability has to be at the centre. So that's what inclusive education is about as well. The person with, in this case, with Down syndrome has to be right at the centre. So in line with that then, we have been pushing for a lot of things. What I'll do now is I'll just touch on a few points in relation to education, then I'll go back to some other issues as well. From September 2017, a new model for allocating special education teachers has been introduced for all mainstream primary school and post-primary schools in Ireland. Under the new allocation model, schools are provided with a set level of special education teaching resources based on the profile need of the school. In other words, it depends on what the school say and the parents say. Under the new model, children can receive additional teaching support based on their learning needs rather than on a diagnosis of disability. Research indicates this is a better way to allocate support, because a category disability on its own tells us little about the level of type of support that a child needs in school. I think that's important. Therefore, parents of children who have Down syndrome can know that their children can receive as much additional teaching support as required in school, taking account of the school-based assessments of their learning needs. There will not be a constraint on the amount of additional teaching time that may be allocated to pupils with Down syndrome.
based on their diagnosis or because they may have previously been diagnosed as being in the mild general learning difficulty category. I know this is something that is supported by Down Syndrome Ireland, and they have long held the view that pupils can have different needs. Centre-based approach is my point, regardless of their diagnosis category, and should not be constrained from receiving resources because pupils may have been in the mild category. Under the new allocation scheme, children do not now have to be diagnosed with a particular condition in order to qualify for the extra teaching assistance or fall within a particular range of diagnosis to access particular levels of support. The new model, it gives greater freedom to schools to give extra teaching help to pupils who most need it, regardless of their diagnosis. They can give the most assistance to pupils who need support and most allocate resources based on needs. And that is the crucial thing as well. Schools also have the flexibility to support pupils in the whole class group, in small groups and individually, and they will support pupils in different ways as needed. And one of these issues, while we were debating this inside in the government and cabinet, one of the issues that we brought into the whole debate and the budget this year in education was we've agreed to appoint 900 new special education teachers are being provided for schools under the new model, so there will be more special education teachers in our schools. And that is one thing that I've been pushing as part of the programme for government and as the minister there. This is a very big and significant investment, which means that there are more special education teachers in school. Under the previous allocation models, which had been made in place prior to 2017, all children with Down syndrome have been entitled to receive an additional teaching support either through the general allocation system, if the child had mild learning difficulties, or if they had an additional low incident disability through an additional allocation to schools by the National Council for Special Education, or as we say in Ireland, the NCSE. Pending the introduction of this proposed new allocation model, a review of the provision for children with Down syndrome was conducted and an interim arrangement was introduced in 2015 to provide additional resource teaching hours to schools and support to those children with Down syndrome who were not already supported through the NCSE Low Incident Resource Teaching annual allocation process. Provision was made for the NCSE to make additional allocations of 2.5 resource teaching hours per week to schools in respect of any child with Down syndrome who was currently eligible for low incident resource teaching hours. This allocation of 2.5 hours per child reflected the allocation rates of children in the mild learning general difficulty range, including those with Down syndrome, prior to the introduction of general allocations for schools. So basically, that is what we do. The other most important thing to ensure as well is that in Irish education is the whole role of the SNAs, the special needs assistants. Special needs assistants are allocated to schools specifically to assist teachers in providing for additional care needs of students arising from the assessed disability. Many children with Down syndrome have care needs in schools and are supported by the SNA support in schools. If a school or a parent considered that a child with Down syndrome has care needs such that they might require access to an SNA support in order to attend school, the school may assist the pupil from within their existing SNA allocation, or they can make an application to the National Council for Special Education for SNA support for their child. Other supports that are also available for in school for children who have Down syndrome including the provision of special school or special class placements for those pupils who need additional specialist interventions. We also have a school transport arrangements may also be made available for those pupils who require special transport arrangements. And the other point as well is in relation to second level education, with the reasonable accommodation at states exam may also be provided where necessary. So these are the kind of supports that we have put in place. Are we doing enough? Absolutely no. Have we a lot more to do? Absolutely yes. We have to invest in the services. As I keep saying to people is, my agenda is reform in the services, invest in the services, and putting the person with a disability at the centre of the services. We have another issue as well in relation to the planning of the services. and I don't know whether you have different models in different countries. I've set up a task force at the moment, and Pat is very involved as well, on the personalised budgets for adults with intellectual disability. And it will suit some young adults or with Down syndrome as well and their families, but again, it's going to be a choice. It's called a personalised budgets, where the person with the disability and their family can decide on a certain allocation model to see how they pick the services and get the services themselves, and have an individualised service rather than going into a main street service, a day service or a residential service. But I'm emphasising that task force is going to come back to me just before Christmas. I'd say it'll probably in the next 3 or 4 weeks with recommendations. But essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to give choices for people with disabilities, both physical and intellectual, that the rest of us take for granted every day. And that's the key thing here. Is if we're talking about equality, we're talking about citizenship, we're talking about respect, we have to implement it. So already from going around the country and meeting people with disabilities, there's about, definitely in Ireland, there's about between up to nearly 14% of the disability community that are interested in these personalised budgets. But that's their choice. Other families and other parents and other people with disabilities will make another choice. But what I want to do is ensure that people can have choice in services and control over the budgets. Because some of the money in Ireland, like in Ireland, in relation to services, with this year in the budget, we're spending 1.763 billion in the social care services aspect to disabilities. And every time that's an increase of 75 million on last year's budget. But I have an issue that this money is not going in the places that we wanted and the Pat wants it and a lot of people here want it. And that is the focus that I want to make sure, that the money goes towards the person with the disability and the services they want. So we have this whole broader issue of ensuring that support services. But as I said earlier on in my comments earlier on, during the banking crisis and the crash, the disability services were really hit bad. And I presume the same thing happened right in the other European countries. And so what we're trying to do now is we're trying to basically catch up. So what I want to do is, while we're catching up and investing in disability service, but I also want to reform the services in line with the person with disability. So that's the key thing. So whether it's in education, like we're talking about this morning, inclusive education, but also on the whole social care aspect of disabilities. And like we had, within a matter of months, we had it was called the Respite Care Grant, was cut during the crisis. You think about that, that was a grant for families to help them get respite, for people, particularly people with profound intellectual disabilities. So within a matter of months, that was the first thing I put on my little shopping list, was restore that, and that was restored to 101,000 families in Ireland, that grant. Then we moved on to we had about 10 or 11,000 children with very, very severe illnesses and disabilities who didn't have medical cards, and they were on domiciliary care allowance. That was another thing we put out, that we restored that immediately. So we've started putting out the fire. When I turned up the first day of my job, there was no consistent plan for adults in day services. So I said to everyone in the department, let's fix day services first. So we spent 4 or 5 months fixing the day services, because we have 1,500 people when there are 17 every year, and they come into the day services. And sometimes in the past, particularly during the years of the austerity, those families didn't have a day service, didn't know where their child or son or daughter were going in September. So we just made it, we sorted that out. We said every family has to know in June where their son or daughter is going in September. So that's for another fire. But we still have the fires, as I call them, to put out. I'm talking about emergency cases, I'm talking about respite services. Pat would know that as well, but I don't know what the situation is in other countries. So what I'm saying is that people think when they hear, and some of my colleagues in Cabinet think, they say, McGrath, what are you moaning about? You get 1.763 billion. Do you realise? And what I say to them very, very easily is two things. First of all, they don't realise the hit the disability services took. They don't really understand it. But they're getting to understand it after working with them for a year. But the other thing is, which is very important, and it's related to your conference this morning, and again, apologies for coming in the middle of your little spiel. The other thing is, when we talk about it, Pat would know this as well. When we're at the cabinet table, you have the ministers and the Taoiseach, in Ireland we call it the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister, and we're all sitting around this big table. So anything comes up about disabilities, the first few months they were inclined to look down at Finian and say, Finian, right, what's your response? What do we do here? What's your angle? So I'd always answer the question, because there's health or an education issue like that. But then I'd also kick it right up the table and say, guys and girls, disability is not just the Minister for Disability. It's every single person in this room has to have something. So what we did was, a couple of months ago, we sat down and we have a 4-year National Strategic Disability Inclusion Plan, which takes every department and say, what are you doing on disability? Education, transport, social protection, foreign affairs, what is employment? How many people are involved in employment? We've another issue is, and we're trying to develop this, adults with intellectual disabilities particularly. We have 2 issues here. We've people with intellectual disabilities who are not in the workforce enough, right? And we're trying to get more of them into the workforce. And we've about 8,000 over the last 17 or 18 months have come in, little part-time jobs, but they're feeling they're making a contribution, they're getting a few bob for themselves, part of society. That's great. That's inclusive employment in one way. Some of them have gone on further. I know a young adult with Down syndrome who was supposed to do his 10 hours a week or his 15 hours a week and got on so well in the shop and the business, staff were mad about him, loved him to bits, and now he's about 30 hours a week. And he just got on, so different people. So I keep telling people with disabilities, it's all about your ability, and there's a role for everybody. But the other thing is that's on the whole employment issue. But the other thing then is in relation to when you talk about when I go around the country and I'm meeting people with all sorts of disabilities, there's also a huge pool out there, and you would know this yourself, of people with amazing talents that society and we as a government and we as a country and you as different countries that sometimes just ignore. I mean, I'm particularly right, I was in the CRC recently. The CRC would be the Central Remedial Clinic, which deals mostly with physical disabilities and therapies and all that. And I was doing a talk there about 3 months ago, and I went in doing a talk like this, and then afterwards questions and answers. A group of young men and women, just severely physically disabled, but intellectually absolutely fantastic. Great debate, loads of rows, and loads of talent in the room. And just kind of drummed home to me the skills that was in the room, and yet the vast majority of people that I would know in the broader society didn't realise these skilled people were around the place. So I'm just making that point is I want to focus on people's ability. So that's essentially who I am and what I'm about. But as I said it's very important that we all work together at a European level. We exchange ideas, and we also be open to change, but also be open to change on the side of the person with the disability. And sometimes I get criticised because I spend a lot of time dealing with respite service and carers, that I spend too much time talking about carers and respite and all that, and not enough about disability. I never do that, but sometimes that perception can go out. So what I'm saying is, I emphasise that the person with disability has to have a say in managing the resources. And can I say to all of you delegates, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, because Pat wouldn't know me for a long time, if you ever want to come, both personally or with your family, you're always very welcome in our Parliament, and I mean that. And even if you come over here on a private holiday, you're welcome to come in and see us and visit us. We have an open door and particularly with my own background in Down syndrome. Anybody comes to our Parliament, if you want to visit us, see us, you're more than welcome. And even if you come on a weekend in a family trip and there's only 2 or 3 of you there, and you want to ring Pat and Pat will text me, I'll set up something for you. Because I want to make sure.
Thank you.
Yes, no, seriously. I want to make sure that our Parliament, and you should go back and tell your own countries as well, is get many people with families, carers, professionals who believe in the rights of persons with disability. I want it to be a regular occurrence. And so in my office every day, if you go into my ministerial office, you'll see droves of people going in and out. I mean, down the coffee bar, in the canteen, people with disabilities, all sorts of it, right across the whole spectrum of the disability family. And I want that to be their Parliament as much as anybody else. And that is the message that I'm sending around. And it's a message I send out nationally in Ireland, but I would love you to send it out, and I include you all in the invitation. And once again, I want to thank you very much. Enjoy your stay in Ireland, and the best of luck. I want to thank Pat again for inviting me this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.